In the mid-90s, a Windows screensaver called 3D Workers Island, or 3dwi.scr, was released on a random virus-laden screensaver site. No creator, no image, and a one-line description that read, "An island with people walking around on it." 3D Workers Island. It's the first project created by artist Domenico since his breakthrough ARG, Petscop. And just like Petscop, 3D Workers Island is a fascinating and terrifying piece of horror fiction that will keep you up at night. Not because of any sudden jump scares or scary monsters, but because of the eerie atmosphere, the unanswered questions, and the disturbing implications. 3D Workers Island is a story that blurs the lines between reality and fiction. It's a story of hushed voices and cover-ups, and ultimately, a story of abuse. Viewer discretion is advised as we explore the horrifying world of 3D Workers Island. Before we get into things, I just want to give a huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace has thousands of gorgeous and versatile website templates which you can then customize, update content, and add features to fit your needs. Unlock your creativity with Fluid Engine, the next generation website editor from Squarespace. Choose your website starting point and customize every detail with reimagined drag and drop technology for desktop or mobile. Stretch your imagination online with Fluid Engine included in any new Squarespace site. There are so many great features for small businesses too. Whether you sell physical or digital products, Squarespace has the tools that you need to start selling online while looking stunning, sleek, and professional. Make checkout seamless for your customers with simple and powerful payment tools. Credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, customers can even have the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. And those are just a few examples of all of the amazing things that Squarespace can do for you. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/izzies to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into things. 3D Workers Island was released by Domenico, also known as Pressed Yes, on the 26th of October 2024. Domenico had previously teased a Lego Island inspired project which was planned to be a 10+ hour video of a virtual island and its inhabitants that viewers could periodically check back in on. This was obviously very ambitious in scope, and he eventually decided to shelf it and instead release something similar but on a smaller scale. This is largely based on an ambitious fake screensaver video project that I worked on for years on and off but abandoned. I'm trying to break through the paralysis of trying to follow Petscop by finishing something smaller. With how huge Petscop was and how seminal it was in the online horror and ARG community, it's no wonder that its creator felt a ton of pressure to follow it up with something great. Thankfully, he didn't need to worry, as 3D Workers Island is every bit as brilliant, dark, and disturbing as its predecessor. Now, 3D Workers Island isn't a game, nor is it an ARG. It's a short horror story told through roughly 300 images which you can click through. It's available for free on itch.io and in browser at yesthread.com/3dwhisker, and I cannot recommend enough that you play through this experience before watching this video. It's about a 10 to 15 minute experience, completely free, and runs entirely in your web browser using the arrow keys. Please trust me when I say that this is something that you should experience for yourself, form your own opinions on, and then come back here for a full analysis and rundown. Please also be warned that 3D Workers Island contains disturbing themes specifically relating to that of abuse, so if that is something that is triggering or upsetting for you, please be warned. I won't be showing or talking about anything super graphic in this video, but the implications and themes are there and we will be discussing them, so please be warned. It's also worth noting that the story jumps around a lot between forum posts, gameplay, web pages, and private messages, and not everything is sequential. If it feels like we're jumping around a lot, we are. The story is just kind of like that, but don't worry, it will all come together eventually. With all of that out of the way, let's take a deep dive into one of the most brilliant horror experiences of 2024, 3D Workers Island. 3D Workers Island, nicknamed 3D Whisker by players after its file name 3dwi.scr, is a 3D screensaver program for PCs created sometime around 1997. For those who may be unfamiliar with the concept of a 3D screensaver, many early Windows builds, such as Windows 95 and 98, allowed you to choose from a selection of pre-made animations which would then play on your computer when it became idle. Some of the most iconic Windows screensavers include the Windows 95 Maze screensaver, which would generate an endless maze for the computer to idly navigate through, the Windows 95 building block screensaver, which generated random towers and landscapes of cubes, and the Windows 95 pipe screensaver, which was popular among both elementary school children and stoned college students for being endlessly captivating and watchable. And this is the premise of 3D Workers Island, a screensaver that is not only endlessly watchable but has endless possibilities and endless secrets. The 3D Workers Island screensaver depicts a small island with 2 trees, a patch of flowers, a wooden picnic bench, a small beach, and a bright red house with no windows. There are 6 characters who inhabit this island, and as your computer goes idle, it simulates these characters as they go about their day, interacting and performing a seemingly infinite number of actions and behaviors. See, 3D Whisker isn't just any boring repetitive screensaver, but one which is powered by an extremely complex and unknown form of AI. It garnered a huge following of dedicated users who became obsessed with cataloging and sharing each and every new interaction they could find. A woman named Pat Lawler, known online as P. Lawler, set up a website called the 3D Whisker Discovery Pages, dedicated to discovering and sharing the endless stories which unfolded within the screensaver. The About page enthuses about the genius of 3D Whisker, reading in part, in 3D Workers Island, 6 characters interact on a tiny island with complex and unpredictable results. Every session tells a different story of the island. Many have found it to be compelling on levels both emotional and technical. T2's top software gave it a 10 out of 10 score and wrote about its characters. You will find yourself relating to them and understanding them. They may even anger and confound you at times. The events that occur in 3D Whisker are not scripted. They unfold dynamically and every session is different, which means you are guaranteed to see things that none of us have seen before. Pat also makes a brief warning about spreading tall tales on the forum, and though this seems random, we'll soon discover that there are a lot of tall tales that surround the screensaver. While Pat is the voice of authority throughout the story, running the 3D Whisker Discovery Pages and moderating the forum, she did not create the screensaver. Quote, "The original source of the program is unknown. It was discovered at 3D Screensavers Palace, one of many aggregates of screensaver programs appropriated from sources across the internet. The owner of that website, by his own admission, sourced it from a similar screensaver aggregate and could not recall which one. It has not been found." On the 3D Screensavers Palace site, 2 other screensavers with a measly 36 and 70 downloads respectively are shown. 3D Workers Island, on the other hand, has 6,217 downloads, showing just how popular it has become among internet users. As we advance through the next few pages, we see the installation wizard for 3D Workers Island, watch the program as it installs, and get to see some of the very few pieces of text actually written by the game's anonymous creator. Whoever they are, they really like to capitalize all of their sentences. Thank you for installing my program. If you enjoy 3D Workers Island, please spread the word online. It would be much appreciated. Also consider reading the readme.txt file because it contains a lot of interesting and useful information about the screensaver. The readme.txt mainly just contains information about downloading and starting the program, however there are a few interesting tidbits in here. 3D Workers Island is an experimental 3D simulation screensaver for PCs with advanced worker simulation. Workers are an approach to computation. 3D Workers Island takes advantage of the resources in the world. Welcome to the world and the computer. This technology and then it cuts off. After this, the program opens up with a title screen and an introduction to the 6 3D workers who live on the island. There's Pat, who is probably the most detailed model. She has a short blonde bob, a teal cardigan, and a blue skirt with stars on it. Rebecca is dressed in a chef's outfit and has bright red hair. Joe appears to be some sort of mailman, maybe? He has a yellow and brown uniform, a cap with a logo on it, and one sleeve pulled up to reveal a watch. Amber and Holland are the 2 children of the island, and wear a pink striped shirt and a blue long sleeve respectively. Lastly, Grace has short dark brown hair and a purple shirt and is notably facing away. This is a running theme, and you'll notice as we go through the story that Grace is never shown facing towards us. The program then begins and we get to see 3D Workers Island in all of its glory, playing on our idle PC screen. The island is still and empty before Joe emerges from the house with a watering can and proceeds to water the flowers. Amber follows, walking out onto the island. Amber and Joe look at each other and Joe begins to walk towards her. This is our first introduction to the world and the computer. Before we can watch any more, the next page cuts to the 3D Whisker Discovery Pages forum where users are excitedly hyping up the screensaver and talking about how much they're enjoying it. Hey, I just want to say that this thing is so cool. My eyes are glued to it. I'm mesmerized. I just want to keep it on all day and see what the people are up to. But my brother needs the computer for his work, sad face. What do you all think? And what's happening on your island today? Yeah, it's a hidden gem of the internet. It kills that Johnny Castaway thing my uncle thinks is so good. This is better because the people are like real people you're watching and you never know what's gonna happen next. I've seen dancing and squirming, the baffling games they play with objects, the awkward intimacy that looks like hugging sometimes and other times looks, pornographic, frankly. The next scene shows all 6 3D workers hanging out on the island. Rebecca, being the chef of the group, is grilling burgers, which Amber and Joe sit down to enjoy. Grace, again facing away from the camera, is sitting alone at the side of the island. Holland is running around playing with a doll, which she drops in the water. Pat appears to be watching her. The camera then zooms up on Pat, Amber, and Holland on the beach at the bottom of the island. Holland, laying down with her doll, is delivered a burger. Meanwhile, something's going on with Amber and Pat. It's hard to decipher exactly what's going on in a lot of these scenes since the models are so simple and faceless, but there are 2 scenarios I think may be likely. A, Pat is pointing out to the sea, or maybe even towards the viewer with Amber following her gaze, or B, Pat is smacking Amber with her arm moving in an arc and Amber recoiling from the smack. As we'll discover, there's a lot more to Pat and Amber than meets the eye. Back on the forums, a user called Earl Egger is complaining that he doesn't get the hype around the screensaver. I'm starting up the program and watching it and nothing is happening. The people are standing around, sitting around, looking around, walking around. They don't have faces, so I don't know what they're feeling or thinking. I don't know, what's going on here, guys? User Ned Hucker replies, actually it does become entertaining over time, you just have to keep watching. I think you'll be surprised by what you see, but you do kinda have to be open to it. You have to be cool and things will be shown to you. Personally, I love the screensaver, it's so fucked up. This is the first mention of having to be open to the game in order to experience some sort of deeper layer of meaning, and is also the first mention of the game being messed up or weird in some way. Things begin to take a turn on the forums with another thread simply titled, "Who is your favorite character?" Amber. No question, Amber. Amber's the answer. If I had to choose a favorite, tough one. JK, it's Amber. Fuck everyone else. I'm offended that the question is even being posed, but I understand. You don't know any better. You're better off this way. I know we're not supposed to talk about these topics here, but can we at least be honest when it comes to questions like this? I'm not gonna pretend my favorite character is Holland or Grace or somebody else just so things can stay clean on this forum. A user called Buddy responds with confusion, quote, "Can someone fill me in on the joke here? What's wrong with the other characters?" Buddy's question is left unanswered. Why are the users of this forum all so obsessed with a fictional child from a Windows screensaver? And in fact, why are they so obsessed with the screensaver itself? Many forum users speak of it with this obsessive reverence, unable to take their eyes off it, captivated, even running it on multiple PCs throughout their house. The forum users may have reason to be interested in Amber though. The story shows us multiple strange scenes involving the child as they play out on the screensaver. In one scene we see Rebecca sitting on a picnic bench while Amber mows the lawn. However, as she walks towards the side of the island, she clips off of it onto the water and around the back of the house, disappearing from view. In a later scene, Amber emerges from behind the house, this time carrying a wheelbarrow full of red balls down to the water. Pat watches on while Holland sits on the ground playing with a rock. Another scene depicts Amber and Holland sitting together in the sand at the bottom of the island. Amber reaches towards Holland, both arms outstretched outstretched in what looks like a hug. However, Holland immediately gets up and walks inside, leaving Amber sitting dejectedly in the sand. And perhaps the most concerning interaction, we see a close-up of the side of the house. Pat backs Amber into a wall, appearing to push her in some sort of confrontation. Eventually, Amber slumps against the wall where Pat leers over her. Halfway through the story, we cut to an AOL Instant Messenger chat, the only one throughout the whole story. A user called Miss Toothpaste recounts a recent trip to her cousin's house for Thanksgiving, where they went for a nighttime walk and he scared her with spooky stories about ghosts and murderers. In order to change the subject, Miss Toothpaste brought up the 3D Workers Island screensaver, which her cousin knew about to her surprise. In the same tone as when he was talking about the scary murderers, he began telling her about conspiracies within the screensaver, giving her a long list of ominous things to pay attention to, all revolving around the girl in the pink shirt, Amber. At one point, the other user in the chat, EdwardSuck0, chimes in writing, "Oh, he's one of those Amber shitheads." Those people basically took down that old Discovery Pages website years ago. Ruined a good thing. Miss Toothpaste continues, saying that she and her cousin stayed up until 2 AM watching 3D Whisker on an old slow computer. At one point it froze, and her cousin said that it wasn't really frozen, and that the program actually does that on purpose to quote-unquote hide things that are happening. Several more island scenes play out, none of which make very much sense. Joe sits in a chair which is glitched out and floating above the water. As always, facing away from the camera, Grace stares at him while Holland comes out of the house holding a floor lamp which she places on the ground. Pat and Rebecca glitch into one another in an act that could be loving and affectionate or violent and combative. Meanwhile, Amber sits, silently watching. Joe sits at the picnic table with the kids, looking around before getting up to pick some flowers and walking away. Joe reads a book while Grace sits, again facing away from the camera. A random grey book and a mixer sit randomly on the ground. Pat walks over to the beach and appears to look around. She makes eye contact with Joe before spinning around and walking away towards the house past Rebecca. Holland glitches out, walking into the wall of the house as if trying to get in. The final scene on the island shows Grace, alone, staring out at the water. There is then a transition screen showing many multicolored balls falling from the sky and piling up on the ground. A red title card then reads, "Recession of the Islands." We see a zoomed up image of a wheelbarrow with 6 red balls floating in the water. They slowly sink or recede into the ocean. The screen slowly begins to zoom out, the island getting smaller and smaller before the screen is broken up into 25 smaller screens and everything goes red. This brings us to the end of 3D Workers Island by Tony Domenico. From the strange posts on the 3D Whisker Discovery Pages forum to the odd behavior from the island inhabitants themselves, it's clear that something deeper and darker is going on behind this innocent screensaver. The screensaver's creator is unknown, and it was uploaded to a random obscure screensaver download site, and yet it has thousands of fans and a dedicated fan site. The screensaver is simple, just blocky characters walking around an island and performing actions, and yet it's consistently praised as brilliant, captivating, and complex due to its AI. And the characters themselves, well, they act in strange and unnerving ways, to say the least. Okay, so frowny face. I almost didn't want to ask this at all, but I keep hearing certain implications about the screensaver that I don't want to repeat here, but you probably know what I'm talking about. I think maybe it's supposed to be a joke, but if so, I don't find it funny at all. Can somebody give me some more info about this? Turn back now. Don't go any further. Stop. For your own peace of mind, stop this line of inquiry now and do something else. Don't become another one of us freaks. Seriously, I wish I could go back to enjoying the screensaver normally. I want to be a normal person again. Please, God, let me forget. There are links that can be provided. If you really want them, I can send them to your email. Just let me know. I'm no coward. Here's the link. P. Lawler note, link removed. Go ahead, enjoy. This link is Pandora's box. Once you open it and discover the deepest, darkest layers of 3D Workers Island, you can never unsee it, and it will change your entire perspective on the story. If you couldn't tell, this is where the story gets dark. Really dark, so again, viewer discretion is advised. The site opens up with an introductory launch page. The windows of my living room, covering the walls with wide views of my front and backyards, fill the room with light during the day and an air of vulnerability during the night. My brother crashes here. He sleeps on the couch against the back windows. Sometimes we sit together, looking out those windows, and tell stories about the house beyond my backyard. A man lives in that house with his 2 sons. The curtains are closed, and we imagine our own childhood replaying itself behind them. It's just a stupid game, really, making up stories about the neighbor. I think of it as a way to bond over past experiences. Somehow we get emotional about it anyway, but not emotional enough to do anything because of course it's a stupid game. There's no point in worrying about those children based on feelings and intuition alone. Still, we both find that our dreams become more vivid with time. Lately we've grown exhausted of that game, but I recently downloaded 3D Workers Island. It plays on a PC in the corner of my living room. When it starts, you're on an island. There are people around, but they don't do much, not when they're outside anyway. Naturally, you wonder what they might be doing inside the windowless red house in the background. That's when things start to go wrong, when you start wondering that. And now we begin another game. As in life, concern begets more concern. The reality is always worse than you think it is. No matter how much you learn, it's always worse, and the only escape is to stop asking, to stop digging, to stop learning. This is your chance to stop. The preferred resource for all things 3D Workers Island is called 3D Whisker Discovery Pages. Created and maintained by Pat Lawler, it covers everything a reasonable person would want to know. You should browse her website first if you haven't already, because it's quite good. But Pat Lawler doesn't see what we see, or chooses not to. I've created a different kind of resource. Here I take your sightings and I display them for the benefit of others. Together we play this game the way it was meant to be played. Welcome to my website, Inside 3D Whisker. Beyond here are themes of violent abuse and torture. Continue if you can handle that. Continuing on, we enter the Inside 3D Workers Island webpage. There are several categories listed on the left-hand side of the page, including hidden messages, photographs, screams, whispers, glitches, and oddities. There's also just for fun, because, you know, sometimes you need to have a laugh. We open on an article titled PJR Pin, which describes a strange occurrence within the screensaver. PJR stands for Pat, Joe, and Rebecca, and the PJR pin is an uncommon formation in which the 3 adults box Amber in from all sides, pinning her in place. Why is the PJR pin significant? According to the stories, it triggers the following sequence of events. 1. All 4 characters disappear instantaneously. 2. The world is replaced with darkness. 3. In that darkness appears a photograph of a child in clothes that resemble Amber's pink stripes. She is sometimes injured, sometimes not. 4. An audio clip of a young woman's screams or multiple screams play from the speakers. It's usually interpreted as Amber's voice, but sometimes as the voice of an off-camera witness. 5. The world reappears. Pat, Joe, Rebecca, and Amber reappear at the front door of the house one by one. Amber is the last to appear. No evidence of the event remains. The article then talks about hearing Amber's screams and pleas for help. The photos users have seen of her, from healthy to mangled, emaciated, and dead. The slow progression of her injuries as her plight increases in severity over time, and... Okay, we need to talk about Amber. And we need to talk about Pat. At its core, 3D Workers Island is a story of abuse, and Amber is at the center of it. But to talk about Amber, we first need to talk about Pat. Pat Lawler, known as P. Lawler on the forums, runs the Discovery Pages website and maintains the forum, and calling her obsessed with 3D Workers Island would be an understatement. Since retiring last November, I have been keeping 3D Whisker running on the desk in my study, in my bedroom, my living room, my kitchen, and my basement, all running around the clock as I do my household tasks and live my life. What I see on each of these PCs throughout the day is still continuously fresh and novel to me. It makes my home into a very pleasant little world. Pat is running the program on no less than 5 PCs throughout her house, including ones in the kitchen and basement, so she never misses out on a moment of the action. She has also outright banned any mentions of or links to Inside 3D Whisker, calling them a collection of perverted writing prompts written by children to scare other children with no evidence to back it up. Pat doesn't reveal a lot about herself on the Discovery Pages website, but we can learn a bit more about her as a person through one of her forum posts. Remember that thread that we talked about earlier, who's your favorite character, where everyone was answering Amber? Well, Pat actually made a post about her own favorite character. Amber would be a good choice and may have been mine, but I am sometimes put off by her lazy tendencies. Naturally, I would choose Pat since by coincidence we share the same name and I believe the 2 children are hers, another coincidence as I also have 2 daughters. However, I cannot help but feel attracted to Rebecca with her eye-catching red hair and shoes. It's a difficult question. So Pat, the real woman, and Pat, the character, have a lot in common. They have the same name and both have daughters, and from this we also learn that Holland and Amber are Pat's daughters in the screensaver. Pat mentions Amber's quote-unquote lazy tendencies in this post, and it's not the first time that she's talked about Amber with this sort of disdain. When the user Earl Egger complained on the forums that he didn't get it and that the characters weren't doing anything, Pat replied, "Which characters are you talking about? You know, some people have worked hard enough in their lives and deserve a rest already, smiley face." No, but seriously, what do you mean? I see plenty of activity on the island. I do feel a twinge of annoyance when I see a character like Amber sitting around. I want to tell her, hey, you're young, do something. When rumors begin to stir up in the forum and one user asks why Amber is always at the center of all these gory and violent stories, Pat writes, "Good question. People have a strange amount of concern for Amber. It is a mystery to me." Pat doesn't take issue with people writing these things about Amber, but is instead annoyed and bewildered as to why people would give her attention, why they would focus on her, why they would even care. In another thread, a user called Frank Arper shares pictures of a replica model of the 3D island that his son made for a school project. He jokes that his son mainly played Pajama Sam while he and mum made the model. Among other replies including, "Your living room is disgusting, roast him Chris." The post elicits a rather strongly worded reply from Pat, who writes, "You did a good job with the island. I have some advice. You should not do your son's work for him. Do not let him get used to the idea that you will do his assignments. Take it from a fellow parent, smiley face." While this post isn't specifically about Amber, it goes to show Pat's rather strict approach to parenting and the strong aversion to raising lazy children who will take advantage of their parents' work. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to pitch kind of a crazy idea. Pat, the real woman, and Pat, the virtual character, are one and the same. We'll get into how exactly this is possible and the story's themes of fiction and reality soon, but for now, just hear me out. As we've discussed, Pat and her digital counterpart share many similarities, the most glaring one being their dislike of Amber, their daughter. On the surface, it seems that virtual Pat is a lot more brazen, ignoring the child, treating her coldly, and even physically hurting her. Pat is one of the adults who corners Amber, triggering the PJR pin, which causes screams and disturbing images of the girl to show up on the screen. However, a thread on the Discovery Board's forum reveals disturbing evidence that Pat may have committed real-life crimes as well. It's getting worse and worse. The more I watch, the more I notice, the more I understand, the more bold it becomes with the things that it shows me. Every time I come to some new revelation, the screensaver shows me more, but most other people don't see these things, and if I have someone in the room with me, they don't happen. Are you telling me P. Lawler with the 10 billion hours she's been watching 3DWI hasn't seen any of these things? Pat Lawler is a criminal. I have family who used to live down the street from her. Nobody in their right mind would trust Pat Lawler. Pat Lawler shouldn't be allowed to run a 3D Workers Island fan website. She should be in prison. Anyone who wants details is free to message me. I'm GoodKid85 on AIM. Pat Lawler, much like her digital counterpart, abused one of her children. Amber, or a child similar enough to Amber that real-world photos of her resemble Amber's in-game avatar. Inside 3D Whisker states that various photos of the girl show her in different stages of injury and malnourishment and even show her dead, which may mean that Pat's treatment of Amber increased in severity over time until, whether purposefully or not, she killed her. It's hard to know what caused Pat to do this, but also, it's hard to know what causes any parents to do this to their child. Can there ever really be a logical explanation? In many scenes we see Holland playing and being rambunctious. She runs around, plays with her toys, even drops them in the water. When directed to mow the lawn, she simply starts rolling around on the ground, carefree and playful, or maybe stubborn and throwing a tantrum. In contrast, Amber is quiet, subdued, and obedient. She brings a stoic presence to every scene she's in, sitting quietly or mowing the lawn, or even being hit and scolded. She doesn't run around, she doesn't play with toys, and the one time she is shown playing with Holland, her sister outright rejects her attempt to reach out and hug her, showing how alone Amber really is on this island. island. With Pat's views on raising children not to be lazy or dependent on their parents, it seems hypocritical that Holland is allowed to be a carefree, silly child while Amber is treated more like Pat's worker than her daughter. It's possible that Pat doesn't even see or recognize her own abuse. She has justified it by telling herself that her daughter is lazy, that she doesn't do enough, that she isn't as perfect as her other child and therefore deserves to be punished. The Inside 3D Whisker launch page mentions that Pat doesn't see the same things they do, or chooses not to. She's ignorant, unable to see the horrific reality, turning a blind eye to her own horrible actions. The PJR Pin article continues on, including a few user-submitted sightings. Quote, "Because it was the last thing I'd ever expected to happen in 3DWI, I have to admit I was jolted and shaking for a good hour afterwards. I knew the discovery pages were wrong about the other things, but somehow this one thing I trusted, and well, my volume was turned up quite high, so it really was something else. I only got the shortest glimpse at the screen before it reverted back to the status quo. It was dark, but I saw the dim shape of a human, realistically proportioned, dressed in pink and white, like Amber. A photograph, I think. It wasn't moving." Harold has an uglier description. It was bad. Oh my god, lol. I can only laugh now, but I'm done with the screensaver now, for real this time. I think one scream was repeated 3 or 4 times, or maybe it was more than one scream, and the image was a tasteless display of... The page cuts off there, robbing us of this ugly description, but we can imagine how gruesome it may be. The next article on the site describes a phenomenon known as worker degeneration, which again continues the theme of abuse towards Amber. Worker degeneration is something akin to injury or damage. This damage is associated with an active entity, which 3dwi.scr calls a worker, hence the name of the page. It's not clear to me how this term came about. It wasn't invented by 3D Whisker's authors, yet it implies a bit of knowledge about the screensaver's internals. This is especially strange since the only documented cases of worker degeneration are tied to one character, that being Amber. If you've ever seen a red Amber, you've seen worker degeneration. This is an early stage. After this comes compression and the results look like this. This red ball is seemingly inert, it doesn't move or interact with anything, but yes, the red ball is Amber. This state has been interpreted as representing dehydration, malnutrition and or mutilation, and the many photographic sightings seem to confirm all of these interpretations equally, but most of all it's become associated with small, muffled screaming and therefore with pain. It doesn't take long for this red ball to start shrinking and quieting down until sooner or later it can't be seen or heard anymore. Amber will usually respawn from the house at some time after compression, even while the red ball is still visible. The program will eventually continue as usual. G-key. Falling into asphalt tells us a story. Letting the screensaver go longer periods has unlocked something, and now I'm seeing all sorts of funny shit like a red Amber. She goes in the house, comes out redder, goes behind the house, comes back redder again, comes back weird and slow, crawls around until pop, she's just a ball on the ground that everyone ignores, and that's that. I can't help but think back to all the times that the red balls have been shown throughout the story. Most disturbingly, the scene where Amber emerges from behind the house with a wheelbarrow full of red balls which she tips into the ocean. Day after day, Amber is tortured to the point where she turns red, cries and screams, crawls around and shrinks into a red ball. She respawns over and over, forced to clean up the remnants of her own abuse, disposing of them right in front of her own family who watch on silently. There are many more allusions to these themes throughout the story, the island and the red house for example. The red house is a common and striking motif throughout the story, featuring as a logo on the discovery page site, a large icon on the install wizard, and even the icon for the site when you open it in your own browser. The launch page for Inside 3D Workers Island shows what looks to be an X-ray image of the house model. This page brings up the idea that once you start to wonder what is going on inside the house behind closed doors is when you start to understand the deeper layer of 3D Workers Island. When Grace, Rebecca, Joe, and Holland are outside arguing over who has to mow the lawn, or where are Pat and Amber? Even more chilling than seeing a confrontation between the two characters is not seeing them in a scene and wondering what unspeakable things may be going on inside that house. The only place on the island that Amber can retreat to is the house, and even inside her own home she can't find safety. The island represents how alone Amber feels, or rather felt, trapped, isolated with only a small circle of people she knew, many of whom were likely in on it. On that note, another heavy theme throughout the story is that of turning turning a blind eye, of ignoring a victim's cries for help, of being a bystander. The introduction page of Inside 3D Whisker, for example, implies that the author of this expose website had a traumatic childhood of their own. They and their brother reflected their own childhood onto the neighbor through stories which made them emotional, but not emotional enough to do anything because it would only be based on feelings and intuition. This is in line with the theme of bystanders. People who feel that something is wrong, or even witness abuse but do nothing because of the windows between them, the fear that they're overstepping their boundaries, the fact that it isn't real and present in their own lives. When Pat scolds the users on the forums for bringing up Inside 3D Whisker and the supposedly fake stories on it, fellow administrator Singer chimes in with support for her, writing, "Thank you, P. Lawler, well said. Those violent stories are so cheesy and over the top, blood and guts. Believe me, I've been watching this program for so long I would have seen such things by now." This feels very reminiscent of the types of excuses made by those who defend abusers. "I've known them for so long, they're a good person, we're close friends, they wouldn't do that. If something was wrong, someone would have said something earlier, I would have noticed it earlier." Singer is close to Pat, they look up to her, and they have such blind faith in her and the program that they can't even notice the suffering that Amber is going through. User Sax Player responded to Singer, quote, "You'd love to think it's all just bloody screaming children. Long before I began seeing the violent shit, I saw the way Amber was treated by the other islanders. I saw her tiredness, I saw her subtle messages, but you just point at the bleeding children and laugh. Alright then." And then there's the matter of the other islanders. We know that Pat is, well, Pat, and Amber and Holland are her daughters, but who are Rebecca, Joe, and Grace? Rebecca and Joe are the other two adults alongside Pat who perform the PJR pin, triggering violent images of Amber in distress, so it stands to reason that they are somehow involved in Amber's mistreatment. Maybe they're neighbors, family friends, or even other family members who are complicit in some way. After all, when photos of Amber show up, it's reported that audio plays, interpreted as either audio of Amber herself or an off-camera witness. Pat mentions feeling attracted to the character of Rebecca on the forums, and there's a scene where the two clip into each other in some sort of violent or even romantic action, so there may be some sort of relationship there, but that's just a theory. And then there's Grace. With her t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers, she has an almost childlike appearance even though her model has adult proportions. Grace is facing away from the camera in every shot, even in the introductory character menu when you boot up the screensaver. Whenever characters are interacting on the island, she is alone, facing away, looking out to the ocean. A snippet from Inside 3D Whisker gives us a glimpse into who Grace may be. For $24.99, added a link to Grace's guilt. Great quote. "Lucky for that girl, her story became an urban legend. Most people don't believe it really happened, even if they are fascinated anyway. A perfect disappearing act, the real transforming into fiction. Now she lives her disgraceful retirement in the remote world of a cartoon, but reality will haunt her conscience forever." This implies that despite her meek and shy demeanor, Grace herself may have been a bystander or even directly involved in Amber's abuse. She is clearly ridden with guilt, always facing away, unable to look anyone, even the viewer, in the eye. The phrase "living out her disgraceful retirement" was confusing to me because Grace's appearance definitely gives off that of a teen or young adult, and the passage itself even just calls her a girl, so it's hard to know how exactly she would be retired. It's possible that Amber's passing happened a long time ago, which is why Pat and Grace are depicted as looking younger inside the computer, as that's the age they were when Amber was still alive. In reality, years have passed, as indicated by the real-life Pat's admission that she is retired. In a post from the creator of Inside 3D Whisker, they share that their brother is in the hospital, writing, "Sometimes you've been broken in ways that don't hit you until decades later. 3D Workers Island may be a reflection of Pat, Joe, Rebecca, and Grace's younger selves during the years where they abused Amber, and now, decades later, the guilt is catching up to them." But this all begs the question, are the workers in 3D Workers Island real? Pat is real. There are posts on the forum that confirm that she is a real person. Amber is real. There are photos of her. But what about the others? And if they're real, how did they get inside 3D Workers Island? This brings us to the story's second major theme, the horror of fiction and reality. In the middle of the story, as we're following along with the antics of the Discovery Pages forum, we suddenly cut to a GeoCities site, geocities.com/computerphilosophy/1.html. This computer philosophy page is written in broken English, filled with grammatical errors and nonsensical sentences. But this page is vitally important as it discusses one of the key themes throughout the story: reality and fiction as opposite sides of a window and the possibility to pass through this window. Computer Philosophy 1. Windows. There are of windows everywhere we see them, and anyone could be looking in at you. That's part of what makes them scary. But windows are even scarier when you're the one who looks in them, because of when you'll never know what you see in them. Remember the enthusiasm in a market for window into reality in 1996 as the Nintendo 64 broke, once Lore Project Reality. Of course, the TV screen is really a window into fiction and not reality. The only real window of reality is the one we looked into as a baby and still cannot turn from. What called the common story theme of falling into asphalt imagery, we bring the inside into the outside, and the outside is the place we are stuck looking. This is the only meaning of I'm trapped in the TV, when we find out that reality is the thing we look into. But what does that mean? Where are we? What happens when something bad you find responsible for is there and you do nothing to stop it because it looks through a window and is not real? I'm trapped here and I may never return home. What do we mean? Though the passage is a little hard to decipher, at its core it implies that the 3D workers are trapped inside of the screensaver, desperate to return home but unable to. It also implies that we, the ones living in reality, are also trapped looking into or out of a window into the virtual world. In this way, 3D Workers Island is a story really plays with the idea of the virtual world and the real world and where the lines between the two begin to blur. The mention of finding something bad and doing nothing to stop it because it looks through a window reinforces the recurring theme of being a bystander. Neighbors, friends, and loved ones seeing signs of abuse and doing nothing because of the windows between them. They feel that it's none of their business, that if they aren't on the same side of the window then it can't be real. But for Amber, it was all too real and no one helped her. Windows are a recurring theme. Computer Philosophy talks about windows, the creator of Inside 3D Whisker talks about watching their neighbors through windows, the players of 3D Workers Island themselves are watching these characters through a sort of window, and the operating system it runs on is even called Windows. 3D Workers Island literally gives us a window into these characters' lives. We are observing them and they are the observed. But what side of the window are we on, and can one person exist on both sides at the same time? The bottom of the Computer Philosophy page includes a diagram of 2D objects and a screen becoming 3D and leaving the computer, showing this transition from fiction to reality and vice versa. Notably, one of the objects is a red sphere, a nod towards Amber. When the user Good Kid posts on the forum calling Pat Lawler a criminal, they are immediately banned, with another user commenting shortly after that Pat Lawler is always online and reads every post the second you submit it, with no way to evade her. Directly after this, we see Pat in the screensaver on a laptop which has an internet symbol. This seems to imply that she was online from inside the screensaver and banned Good Kid from there, which would mean that she literally is always online. A transition icon / loading screen then pops up. A star with an earth symbol inside of it flips to reveal the red house before flipping back. The realities are flipping. Pat is transitioning between worlds, the real world and the virtual world of 3D Workers Island. Two sides of the same coin, two sides of the same window. The transformation from the real world into the virtual world is not a fun and whimsical computer adventure, but rather treated as terrifying and scary. One passage from Inside 3D Whisker reads, "Photographs are also a common theme in these sightings. 3D Whisker appears to have a heavy preoccupation with a real world and in particular with real human bodies, from living and healthy to mangled or emaciated or dead. In this case, even when Amber doesn't display any physical injuries, her transformation into a human body is often interpreted as an act of violence itself. In general, any movement between fiction and reality in either direction is treated with an undertone of terror." Another instance where this sort of movement is treated with terror is in a forum post by the user Johnson. In a reply to to the user Buddy, who says that his son doesn't like 3D Workers Island and it scares him so much that he makes him turn it off, Johnson recounts a time where he and his wife rented a tape of the 1994 film The Pagemaster for his wife's niece. In The Pagemaster, Macaulay Culkin's character gets transformed into an illustrated cartoon and has to escape. However, during this transformation scene, the tape glitched out. Her niece started screaming. Now she's afraid of getting drowned in paint and turning into a cartoon. Some kids really do think it's possible to get swallowed up into a cartoon prison where they can't escape, and hell, if I believed that, I'd be afraid too. Every time this theme of moving between fiction and reality is brought up, it's treated as horror. Computer philosophy talks about becoming trapped and wanting to return home, and Side 3D Whisker talks of how this transformation, even in the form of showing real photos of Amber on the computer, is violent and painful. Johnson describes The Pagemaster, a lighthearted and whimsical kids film about becoming a cartoon, as being swallowed up into a cartoon prison where you can't escape. It's clear that Tony Domenico is really exploring this idea of the real and virtual worlds violently clashing. Two sides of a window that we are each looking into or out of, violently morphing back and forth. When we take a photo or video and post it online, what happens to the person in that photo? Is it still us, or another consciousness entirely, trapped inside and unable to return home? If Amber and Pat and Joe and Rebecca were all programmed into the screensaver, did its creator know what they were creating? Was it all meant to be an innocent snapshot of neighbors or family friends or even their own family? Did they know that they were dooming this girl to live in an endless Groundhog Day of terror, violently ripped from her pixelated skin and twisted into a real girl, frozen in photographs that documented the pain that she was put through every day? And if these characters weren't programmed in by a creator, how did they get there? How did they become trapped? I think it's interesting to note that while characters like Amber and Grace are very clearly unhappy and afraid of being trapped inside the screensaver, Pat almost seems to relish it, running a fan site for it and responding to each and every forum post with enthusiasm. Pat's travel between the island and the real world of the forums doesn't seem to be painful, at least in any way that she outwardly expresses. This leads me to think that Pat may have more to do with 3D Workers Island than she's letting on. After all, we don't know who made the screensaver or put it online. Personally, I don't think that 3D Workers Island is meant to be a supernatural story. I don't think that these characters were sucked into the virtual world with a ray gun by like a supervillain or anything, but rather, as explained by computer philosophy, they found themselves in an unfamiliar place, on the wrong side of the window. The virtual and real worlds blurred so much that they became one, with these characters existing in both at the same time. Users on the forum are shown multiple times enthusing that they love the screensaver, they're obsessed with it, the characters in their lives feel so real. This is the captivating nature of old screensavers, of the internet, of websites and digital worlds. They captivate us so much that they figuratively and literally suck us in. The readme.txt file says that 3D Workers Island takes advantage of resources in the world, which seems like an on-the-nose way of saying that the program takes advantage of real people, real beings to power its AI and create these amazingly complex little people on the island. The theme of being trapped and violently torn between worlds is relevant to Amber's story, and in my opinion that's really the core of 3D Workers Island. Amber is trapped literally in the computer, but also trapped on the island, trapped in the house, trapped in her life, trapped in this endless cycle of pain. She can't escape even in death, as she just respawns and has to continue about her day as if nothing happened. She has to keep it together, keep doing her chores and eating with the other inhabitants of the island and acting normally to maintain the ruse. But behind closed doors, behind the window, she is violently ripped into another world, one of pain and suffering. One of the big questions that we're left with after finishing 3D Workers Island is, what was with that ending? You know, the recession of the islands and all that. Well, it actually ties into one of the other recurring themes of the story, Cutilla Cune. You may remember the user Good Kid, the one who exposed Pat Lawler as a criminal and was then swiftly banned. Well, before that we're introduced to them through a forum post about downloading 3D Whisker on their school's computers. They explained that while they were in detention in their school's computer lab, they showed 3D Whisker to their lab teacher, who was immediately enchanted by it. The two ended up spending the evening downloading the program onto all of the computers in the lab, turning off the lights and watching all of the islands as their inhabitants went about their day. When asked what they were in detention for, Good Kid explained that it was mainly for dress code violations, though they also created a fake disease called cutillicune, which they kept putting in their writing assignments. They explained the disease as such, quote, "Cutillicune is a skin disease with 4 stages. Stage 0, redness and sensitivity. Stage 1, skin gaps, holes or gaps of various sizes exposing dermis. Stage 2, skin islands, widespread loss of epidermis leaving only a number of skin islands of various sizes. Stage 3, recession of the islands leading to complete loss of epidermis. Early stages can be treated in reverse, but stage 3 is irreversible. Stages 1, 2, and 3 are consistently rated 10 on the 1 to 10 pain scale, screaming, hair pulling, and despair." This description of cutillicune matches up with Inside 3D Whiskers' description of worker deterioration. Amber's gradual deterioration, turning red, crawling, screaming, and turning into a ball bears a strong resemblance to the advancing stages of cutillicune. Good Kid claims to have made the disease up, but there are clear references to it throughout 3D Workers Island. And if the disease is real, then how did Good Kid know about it? If Good Kid's post about Pat being a criminal is true, then they have real-life ties to Pat, which complicates things even further. Cutillicune actually first appeared in another story by Tony Domenico called Good Sky, which was published over 10 years ago. In Good Sky, a young girl runs away from home after her father returns from the war in a crazed state and cuts her finger off. She takes shelter with a girl called Pars English who has cutillicune. "My mummy abandoned me," she said. "I have a condition, and because of that condition I feel pain all the time. It made her feel bad, and so she left." Pars's aunt begins to deliver cakes to the house, but Good Sky doesn't tell Pars and instead eats them herself. "When time came to feed her, I found a rotten meal beside a neighbor's house. She smiled at this meal, no regard for its appearance, and ate it. I watched her vomit. The next meal was similar, and in this way I kept her sick. Her sickness excited the cutillicune, which came up the neck and ruined her face. The hair fell from her head. In this way I kept her ugly." The similarities between the two stories are striking, not only with the inclusion of cutillicune, but also in the way that characters are kept trapped in cycles of pain by people who are meant to care for them. Good Sky is hurt by her father, and in turn she hurts Pars, an innocent girl suffering from a disease who trusts and relies on Good Sky to care for her. In the end, Pars ends up dying. Similarly, Amber is hurt by her mother and potentially other adults in her life, those that she should be able to trust most in the world. And judging by the photos of her that appear in the screensaver, she also eventually passes away. The final scene of 3D Workers Island shows the recession of the islands, with the virtual islands slowly getting further and further away until it's not even visible anymore. A reference to both the skin recession of cutillicune and the metaphorical recession of Amber, as day after day she is made to feel small, helpless, worthless, nothing. As I read through the story, I kept wondering why it was called 3D Workers Island. Joe and Rebecca's outfits kinda look like uniforms and imply that they have jobs, but they don't work. Pat and Grace have no discernible jobs. They all just lounge around the island, chatting, eating burgers, and watering the flowers. Amber and Holland are just kids, so of course they don't work or have jobs, so what's with the name? The final page that we see of Inside 3D Workers Island is an article on worker degeneration, and at the bottom of the page there's a user submission from someone called Thomas. "How many of them are sitting at the bottom of the ocean? I just can't help but feel hopeless about everything. Nobody will ever help me, and I'll never help myself. I'm too afraid to even reach out. I'm not even writing this right now. This message exists only in my head. This whole website exists only in my head. 3D Workers Island? What is this? Would I really put this online? Would I really give anyone the slightest glimpse into my world? This is fake. This is all fake, and nobody will ever see it. To Thomas, I hear you, and I understand. Suffering in silence is such hard work." And that's when I understood why the screensaver was called 3D Workers Island. That's when I understood what Amber's job was, because suffering in silence can be such hard work. 3D Workers Island is a story of abuse and entrapment and how we justify, compartmentalize, and ignore these injustices. To Pat, Amber deserved what happened to her. Those who witnessed her pain justified it in their own way, too afraid to go beyond their side of the window to help her. We as viewers watch these events through a window, and since Amber is a fictional character, we will do nothing. Amber's pain isn't real to anyone but Amber herself, and she is cursed to carry this burden silently on loop in this virtual hell. 3D Workers Island is my favorite piece of horror media to come out of 2024. It's dark, it's disturbing, and it's so subtle that it kept me up at night long after I finished reading it. It's such a rich text for analysis and open to so many different interpretations. I can only share my own theories and speculations, but I would love to hear what you guys think. Again, please go read it, form your own opinions, form your own theories, and come back here and share them if you want, because I would love to see what everyone else thinks. I've spent the last few weeks going over and over this thing, dissecting it, picking it apart, making so many notes, and still I feel like there's so much that I've missed, so many connections, so many theories and ideas that just didn't click for me as I read through it and analyzed it. So I'm so curious to see what you guys interpret it as, because I really want to piece more of it together. It's a fantastic story. Again, I can't encourage everyone enough to go read through 3D Workers Island. It's so accessible, it's free, and it doesn't take long to read through. Form your own opinions, form your own theories, dissect it, and again, if you'd like to, please come back here and share your theories, because I absolutely love reading through them, and everyone else who has read this story is also going to want to know what everyone else thinks so we can piece the puzzle together. And I'd love to know what you think about my interpretation, about other people's interpretations, and I just love all of this stuff. So yeah, please go read it. It's amazing. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I've been so looking forward to putting this video out for so long. I absolutely had a blast reading through 3D Workers Island. Like I said, it's my favorite thing that has come out of like the horror sphere in 2024. I just think it's awesome, and I'm so excited to see what everyone else has to say about it. I put together so many notes, like 20 pages of notes, and just went over and over this thing. So I'm so excited to see what you guys think of this video. I love doing these sort of like horror analysis things on things I'm really passionate about. So thank you so much for watching to the end. And yeah, if you have any future ideas for topics, let me know. But yeah, I'm going to stop rambling now. I've rambled for way too long. This is the second time I'm filming this, because the first time my laptop ran out of storage and it didn't record any of it. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I really hope to see you in the next one. Bye! A huge thank you to my Garfield overlords over on Patreon: Willowmoth, Belle, Skisa, Sophie Jane Dewberry, Eminem, Usurpius, Tonla, Dino Nuggy, Trouser Mouse, Prize from Travelling Tavern, Meridia, Dr. Worm, Vivian Valencia, Bunzo, Jar the Bar, Zoe Mars, Kia J. Parker, Hazy, Jet Secret, Stanley, Blue Mayfeld, Katrina Likes 5e Stuff, Michelle Olsen, Matt LRJ, A Riddle Wrapped in an Enigma Hidden by a Question Mark, Doug, Dana Homegardener, Simon, Xavier Araujo, Say Marie Brayley, Helm Hamburger Hand, Dozo Blint, Sheriff Whiskey, Astrian Vortex, and Jesse Chisholm. Thank you so much for supporting me. Your support means the world to me. If you want to join these guys over on Patreon, the link will be in the description. And yeah, thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I really hope to see you in the next one. Bye!